Did you know that some of the most devastating economic collapses in history did not begin with violence, mass panic, or empty banks? In fact, most economic collapses expand quietly, hidden inside budgets, debt figures, and currency markets, long before ordinary people realize that their daily lives are about to change. By the time collapse becomes visible, the damage is already deeply embedded. To understand what economic collapse really looks like, we must move beyond headlines and examine how it has unfolded across history. An economy is a system built on confidence. Economic collapse begins when that confidence weakens, usually not because of a single failure, but because of multiple pressures accumulating over time. High public debt, declining productivity, persistent trade deficits, or excessive reliance on a single export can all weaken an economy's foundation. When these vulnerabilities meet an external shock, such as war, commodity price swings, or global financial tightening, the system begins to fracture. In the early stages, collapse is largely invisible to the public. Economic growth may slow, but life continues. Governments borrow more to maintain stability. Central banks intervene to protect currencies. One of the clearest historical examples of this process occurred in Germany after World War I. The country emerged from the war with enormous physical destruction and financial obligations. Under the Treaty of Versailles, Germany faced reparations equivalent to more than twice its annual economic output. Industrial production was weak, tax revenue was insufficient, and foreign currency reserves were limited. To meet its obligations and fund domestic spending, the government increasingly relied on printing money. Between 1921 and 1923, this decision triggered one of the most extreme hyperinflation episodes in recorded history. The German mark collapsed in value, with prices doubling every few days by late 1923. A loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in early 1923 cost over 200 billion marks by November. Savings accumulated over decades were wiped out entirely. Salaries lost purchasing power within hours. While those holding real assets or foreign currency survived, the middle class collapsed economically. This was not merely an inflation crisis, it was a collapse of trust in money itself, with lasting social and political consequences. When wages failed to keep pace with rising costs of food, fuel, and housing, living standards decline even if employment remains high. This is often the point at which households begin cutting meals, selling assets, and abandoning long-term plans. A modern example of this process can be seen in Venezuela. Despite holding the world's largest proven oil reserves, Venezuela relied on oil exports for over 90% of its foreign currency earnings. When oil prices fell sharply after 2014, government revenue collapsed. Instead of adjusting spending, authorities expanded money supply and imposed strict price and currency controls. By 2019, inflation exceeded 1 million% annually, according to international estimates, while the economy contracted by more than 70% over a decade. The collapse was not caused by a lack of natural wealth, but by systemic policy failure and institutional breakdown. Inequality widens rapidly, not necessarily because wealth increases at the top, but because losses are unevenly distributed. Crime often rises, driven less by criminal intent than by survival. This stage marks a shift from economic crisis to social strain. Political stability becomes fragile, even in countries with strong institutions. Zimbabwe offers a stark example of what happens when monetary systems collapse entirely. Between 2006 and 2009, years of declining agricultural output, fiscal deficits, and political instability pushed the government to finance spending through money creation. Inflation accelerated to extraordinary levels, reaching an estimated 79.6 billion% per month in late 2008. Eventually, the government abandoned its own currency altogether, allowing foreign currencies to replace it. Public services collapsed not because people stopped working, but because money stopped functioning as a system of exchange. As collapse deepens, institutional failure follows. Governments struggling to finance operations reduce maintenance and investment. These institutional failures further reduce productivity, creating a feedback loop that makes recovery increasingly difficult. Sri Lanka's recent collapse illustrates how quickly this stage can arrive. Years of heavy foreign borrowing, combined with tax cuts that reduced government revenue by nearly 30%, left the country vulnerable. By 2022, foreign reserves had fallen below $2 billion. Insufficient to pay for essential imports. Fuel shortages halted transportation, electricity was rationed, and food inflation exceeded 90% at its peak. The government defaulted on its debt for the first time in history. While political leadership changed, rebuilding economic trust proved far more difficult than replacing officials. The long-term cost of economic collapse extends beyond statistics. Employment instability disrupts education and career paths. Migration separates families and drains skilled labor. Children raised during collapse often associate adulthood with uncertainty rather than opportunity. Even after inflation is controlled and growth resumes, these social scars remain. Economic collapse is not a theory. It is a recurring event in modern history, and it has never announced itself clearly before arriving. For ordinary people, the danger is not only the collapse itself, but the lack of preparation when familiar systems suddenly stop working. This topic matters because economic breakdown does not affect everyone equally. When collapse arrives, it does not look like a single dramatic moment. It appears first as shortages, job losses, inflation, and uncertainty about tomorrow. The Great Depression of the 1930s offers a clear example. In the United States, unemployment reached nearly 25%. Industrial production fell by almost half. Savings vanished as banks collapsed, and wages dropped even for those who kept their jobs. What made the crisis devastating was not only the economic downturn, but the absence of safety nets and personal preparedness. Families who relied on a single income or had no savings were pushed immediately into survival mode. More recent cases show similar patterns. In Argentina's 2001 collapse, the government froze bank withdrawals to prevent a financial run. Overnight, people with money in the bank could not access it. The peso lost over 70% of its value within months. Salaries became meaningless, imports disappeared, and unemployment doubled. Those who survived best were not the wealthy, but people with diversified income, strong community ties, and practical skills. Economic collapse affects ordinary people through several direct channels. First is inflation. When governments print money to cover debt or stabilize systems, purchasing power declines. In hyperinflationary episodes such as Zimbabwe in the late 2000s, prices doubled in days. Food, medicine, and fuel became unaffordable, even for working families. Savings lost value faster than people could spend them. Second is employment instability. During economic crises, businesses reduce costs quickly. Jobs in services, retail, and manufacturing disappear first. Even skilled workers face delayed payments or unpaid wages. According to World Bank data, severe economic crises typically lead to unemployment increases of 10 to 20 percentage points within a year. This means preparation cannot rely solely on job security. Third is system disruption. Supply chains break down. Imported goods vanish. Power, transportation, and healthcare systems become unreliable as funding dries up. During Greece's debt crisis after 2010, hospitals reported shortages of basic medicines, and electricity cutoffs became common. Collapse affects daily life in practical, uncomfortable ways long before it appears in official statistics. For ordinary people, preparation is not about panic or isolation. It is about reducing vulnerability. The most important step is financial resilience. History shows that cash loses value during inflation, but total dependence on banks carries risk. Diversifying savings across accessible cash, basic assets, and essential goods increases flexibility. Even small emergency reserves can buy time during sudden disruptions. Income flexibility is equally critical. In every major economic collapse, households with multiple income sources adapt more quickly. This does not mean complex investments, but practical skills that can generate value locally: repair work, food production, teaching, caregiving, or digital services that reach outside the local economy. Skills travel better than money. Equally important is expense control. During collapse, income often falls faster than prices. Families that understand their true necessities, food, shelter, energy, are able to adjust faster than those locked into debt and fixed costs. Historically, high household debt amplifies the damage of economic shocks, as seen during the 2008 global financial crisis when mortgage defaults surged. Social networks are often underestimated, but they are among the strongest protective factors. During the Soviet Union's collapse in the early 1990s, informal exchange networks replaced failing markets. People shared food, skills, and information. Communities with trust survived better than individuals acting alone. Collapse isolates those who try to face it individually. Facing economic collapse also requires psychological readiness. Uncertainty creates fear, and fear leads to poor decisions. Historical accounts repeatedly show that people who accepted reality early, without denial or panic, were able to adapt faster. Preparation is not about predicting exact outcomes, but about remaining flexible as conditions change. Economic collapse does not end civilization, but it reshapes daily life. For ordinary people, the goal is not to outsmart the system, but to reduce dependence on fragile structures. History is clear on this point. Those who prepare quietly, diversify modestly, and stay connected endure disruptions better than those who assume stability is permanent. The lesson from past collapses is not despair, but realism. Economies recover, but households must survive the transition. Preparation is not extreme behavior. It is a rational response to a repeating historical pattern. And in uncertain times, resilience is not built through fear, but through understanding, adaptability, and patience.